Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to look at how many chains do I need to start a blanket. This is when you don't have a pattern and you're choosing your own stitch. Right, so first of all, before you do anything, you need to decide the following: the width you'd like your blanket to be. The blanket width determines the number of stitches you actually need. You also need to decide which stitch you would like to use, what yarn you'd like to use, making sure, of course, you use the recommended hook size for that yarn. And I would recommend very strongly that you write down what you have chosen. So, first and foremost, we need to make a little gauge swatch. Here I've got two swatches here, so let's have a little look. What is a gauge swatch? Well, it's usually a little crochet square, 4x4, and it allows you to count your rows and stitches. So the rows, you count the rows this way and the stitches across. You can then compare your gauge to a pattern gauge, for instance, if you have one. And then the gauge swatch will also help you work out how many stitches or rows you need for your actual project. So to make a gauge swatch, what do we do? Need to crochet, well, this is how I do it. I crochet a length of chain, roughly 5 inches, unstretched. And then whichever stitch I would like to make my blanket or project out of, I work a little crochet square, roughly 5 inches by 5 inches. And then when I've done it, which I have done here, I then lay it down flat on a little surface like so. If I just zoom in slightly, it might help. Now I've finished talking. So you then need to make sure it's facing you the right way. So you've got it right side up. Don't stretch it at all. And then you need to mark out a little 4-inch square with some pins around more of central. Or you can do like I do, cut out a little 4-inch square from some card and then just lay that over your work. Now today we're going to be counting our stitches, and when it's patterned like this, I always find it's easier to lay the little crochet measuring tool over the top of the stitches like this, and then count the tops of the stitches here. And if we have a little look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 stitches. So I'd make a note of that. I'd also make a note of what yarn it is and what type of hook I've used. And I write a little thing here. So I've used a 5mm hook. The gauge is 4 inches and I have 14 stitches and 14 rows. So I'll give you another example here. I've used a chunky yarn and it's a baby blossom. I've used a 7mm hook. They recommended a 6.5 on the yarn label, but I've used a 7 as I didn't have I do have a 6.5, but with this particular stitch, I do prefer slightly more open. Right, and this time I got 10 stitches across. So here's my little measuring tool here. The right side of my work's facing me, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but if I just gently hold it like this, you can see the tops of the stitches there. And there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now I know that this is done with a double crochet and a single crochet, so I can see that's a double. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Sometimes you will get a half a stitch and you do need to take note of that. Right, so that's how you measure the stitches. counting the rows is a little bit more difficult, and we don't really need to count the rows when we're looking at how many chains we need for our blanket. But if you wanted to count your rows, just lay your little gauge across here and then just go ahead and count your rows this way and make a note of those. Okay, so now we've done that and we've calculated how many stitches there are in 4 inches. We need to do a few calculations. So let's have a little look. I've done some typing here. So I'll just let you see what else I've done. I made a little note of the chunky yarn, and I have 10 stitches. We need to pay attention to the stitch count, not the rows. So in 4 inches we had 10 stitches. Okay, and more notably, the width of our blanket, we'd like it to be 24 inches. It would be 30 inches long. That's the width I've chosen for a particular blanket, but in this instance you just keep crocheting until you reach 30 inches. But if you were writing a pattern, you'd use a similar thing as what we're doing now. So our blanket width is 24 inches. And I've written here, we need it to be 24 inches wide. We know that in 4 inches there are 10 stitches. So if we work out how many stitches are in an inch and then multiply this by 24, we should have our stitch count. So we know in 4 inches there are 10 stitches. So we can see because we wrote it down and we're using the chunky. And then it's a good idea to work out how many stitches are in an inch. Because sometimes you do get very strange numbers coming up. So to get how many stitches are in 1 inch, simply divide your number of stitches by your 4 and you get 2.5 stitches to an inch. So if you need 24 inches, just times however many stitches are in an inch to get your total number of stitches that you need, which will translate to chains. Now this is where I need to add on a little extra, saying always check if the stitch pattern is in multiples plus any extra stitches. For example, your stitch might be in, little pattern might be in multiples of 3 plus 2. If that's the case, get the number of chains or stitches you would need for 24 inches, divide it by the multiples, which is 3, and that gives you 20. And that is equal. So 60 is divisible equally by 3, so that is absolutely fine. But don't forget we've still got the plus 2, so we need to add on 2 to the 60, which gives us 62. Now the total number of chains we need is 62. Okay, so if I just lay that down there for you, that might be helpful if you'd like to do a little screenshot. Or if you're really interested, I could pop it in the description box below. Right now for the Aran yarn, we need to do the same calculation. So let's have a look. I made a little note of the Aran yarn and I got 14 stitches in the 4-inch gauge. Okay, so we need also for this little blanket 24 inches wide. So similarly, in 4 inches we have 14 stitches. Working out how many stitches are in 1 inch, divide 14 by 4 and it gives us 3.25 stitches to 1 inch. But we need 24 inches for our blanket, so we would then times 24 by the 3.25 and it gives us 78 stitches. Therefore we do need 78 chains to start our blanket, unless of course there are multiples, and then we'd have to take all that into consideration. Right, so that is a little bit about how to calculate your chains that you might need to start a blanket. Let's have a little look here. Yeah, right. We've done all that. Now, the next thing is, you're welcome to go now, but if you'd like to just listen to a little bit more, say you've got a little pattern and you're needing to make something to a pattern and it has a gauge. I live in the UK, so we use tension in the patterns here. And I'm not breaking any copyright because you can't see the pattern. But for instance here, when you first get your pattern, have a look and they will tell you the gauge they would like you to use or the tension. So here they're suggesting that you need to make, or you should have 17 trebles and 10 rows. So 17 trebles would be double crochet in the US, and that would be stitches to your 4-inch gauge, and you should have 10 rows, and that would be using a 4mm hook. And then they had this little, all the size required to give the correct tension. Now that is where, if you have a look at this little chart I did, supposing that is exactly what they want you to use, a 7mm hook, and they would like your gauge to be 12 rows and 10 stitches, then you're spot on. But what if you're way out and using what they've said, the hook size, and you get a different stitch count? You may have to adjust your hook size, because that plays a part in how many stitches you get per inch or rows per inch. Sometimes if you have too many rows, you may need to go up a hook size, go in half sizes to start. And if you have too few stitches, you'd need to go down a hook size. Right, so that's just a little bit of extra information. I think I've got another sample here where it says tension, again, UK patterns, and they've given you 2 tension swatches they'd like you to work to here, because they have an extended double crochet, which is an extended single crochet, and they want to make sure you're doing that to the correct height. So they give you a little gauge here in a 4-inch gauge, 4x4 or 10 centimeters, that you should have 17 stitches and 16 rows using a 4.5mm hook. So just be careful, always work your little swatch, your gauge swatch or your tension swatch before you start. And the other thing to remember is that we all crochet differently, so don't worry if it doesn't come spot on here. Just adjust it so it works out the same and you'll be fine. So yes, that's it in a nutshell, really, just how to count your stitches and rows and how to work out how many chains you may need. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you soon. In the meantime, if you're not already subscribed, it'd be great if you would. If you hit the bell notification, that means you won't miss any future videos. And if you've any comments, that would be great too. And also if you could hit the thumbs up if you've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much again, and take care.